Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday, November 6th. We've got a lot to cover tonight, but we're going to get started with Ukraine. It has been forgotten in the news, not many people talking about Ukraine, and apparently Ukraine is now being told to give up, that the U.S. isn't interested anymore, and they need to look into negotiating with Russia. Yes, this is according to NBC News. Here's the report. U.S. and European officials have begun quietly talking to the Ukrainian government about what possible peace negotiations with Russia might entail to end the war, according to one current senior U.S. official and one former senior U.S. official. It goes on to say the conversations have included very broad outlines of what Ukraine might need to give up to reach a deal, the officials said. Some of the talks, which officials describe as delicate, took place last month during a meeting of representatives from more than 50 nations supporting Ukraine, including NATO members known as the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the officials said. They began amid concerns among U.S. and European officials that the war has reached a stalemate and about the ability to continue providing aid to Ukraine. Biden administration officials also are worried that Ukraine is running out of forces while Russia has a seemingly endless supply. Ukraine is also struggling with recruiting and has recently seen public protests about some of President Volodymyr Zelensky's open-ended conscription requirements. So we're now telling Ukraine to do the very thing that many of us were calling for from the very beginning. It's been a year and a half, thousands of people killed. And many knew that the outcome would be this, that Russia would get what Russia wanted, which was the Donbass and to create a land bridge to Crimea. Maybe Russia had some goals to get more of the land. Maybe there was the thinking that they would go all the way to Kiev and that they would take everything up to about Kiev. But they certainly reached the first round of their goal, which was to take Donbass and the land bridge, create a land bridge to Crimea. So Russia accomplished their goals. Ukraine ended up with a lot of people dead. And now the U.S. is saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and tell you to negotiate for peace. This is after the United States has said to Ukraine over and over and over again, we are with you to the end, that there is we are going to stay with this until Russia's defeated. We're going to stick with Ukraine until all of the land is taken back by Ukraine. Now, I was all for peace, so I'm not saying that that's the way to go. I want to make that clear. I am for this. This is ultimately a good thing. Ukraine should negotiate with Russia, should probably give up the land that's already been that Russia's already been able to capture, and move on. They should just move on and try to make peace with their big neighbor that's right next to them. Russia's not going anywhere, and Ukraine isn't either. So this is the best thing for Ukraine, but it is frustrating and really infuriating and devastating in a lot of ways that it took this long and this many lives to get to this point. Countless lives lost for no reason than to get to this point, the point that we could have gotten to at the very beginning. And now what? Now you've got a defeated Ukraine. They've been lied to by the United States government. So the United States government sitting there and saying to them, giving Zelensky standing ovation, saying, we're with you to the very end. They've been lied to by the U.S. government. So now we've lost faith. People have lost their faith in the United States. We look like idiots around the world. They're saying, oh, well, we have to do this because we've got to show China. What did we show China exactly by doing this? What was the goal was to show China our strength. Now that we're telling Ukraine, we're not willing to back you anymore. This is a stalemate. You guys are just running out of forces, and we're not willing to come in and actually fight troops on the ground. So what exactly did we show? The whole point was show China our strength, show them that we cannot be defeated. And yet in a year and a half, we've been defeated. Ukraine has been defeated with the United States prodding and urging, and they've made absolutely no progress. This is the end result is the exact same. So this is infuriating that the United States would lose that people are definitely going to be losing faith in the United States. Ukrainians, you could bet, are going to be pissed off. They're not going to look at the United States as allies and friends after they're forced to quickly negotiate a peace deal with Russia. A year and a half, that's not a long war. It's good. I'm glad that this is ending. I'm glad that we're getting to this point. I'm glad that U.S. officials have finally hold their heads out, and they're actually now telling Ukraine it's time to go for peace. This is a good thing, but it is infuriating. It's cruel, is what it is. It's cruel to have done this to Ukraine, to have led them on in the way that the United States government led them on, to make them believe that we would have their back, that all the NATO countries would have their back. The writing was on the wall from the beginning. Many of us knew the United States absolutely, and NATO did not have Ukraine's back. They weren't willing to let let Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine had been asking for a decade, can we be in NATO? Can we be in NATO? And the answer was always no, you cannot be in NATO. The minute Finland and Sweden say, can we be in NATO? They're inaugurated in just right away. Sure, of course, right now you can join NATO. What a slap in the face to Ukraine. The writing should have been on the wall right from the beginning. And the writing was on the wall for many to see. There was never going to be any other outcome than this outcome. And now we have cruelly strung people along, cruelly I have now left behind countless families who are mourning the loss of their loved ones in Ukraine, looking at the United States saying, we trusted you. You said that you would have our back. You said defeating Russia was your number one priority. We were the ones on the battlefield, sacrificing our lives, and you were giving us money. That was nice. Money and some weapons. But we were sacrificing our lives. And now, after a year and a half, because you've got a shinier new war to go off and fight, a war that you are more committed to, a country you're more committed to. And so now, another country, by the way, that's also not in NATO, Israel's not in NATO. We have no defense agreement with Israel. We have no, it's unclear exactly how Israel is our greatest ally when they've never provided a single troop for any of the combat missions the United States has been in, or any of the wars the United States, or any of the invasions, or any sort of combat. Israel has not contributed any troops. They don't give us weaponry. They say, well, we give you some surveillance, some intelligence. I don't know what that's worth when you look at what's going on now. And so now there's a new war, not even a NATO ally, and Ukraine is being left behind in the dust. Again, this is the right move. They need to be negotiating peace. It would be tragic for this war to continue on anymore, with more lives lost and just continuing to march down the road. That is obviously going to end where it's going to end right now. But this is just so absolutely crushing and infuriating that we would lead these people down this path, that we would force them to sacrifice themselves and their children, their husbands, their fathers, their loved ones. Sickening that we marched them down this path. And that so many people championed it, that so many people today, who, by the way, are the same very people marching in the streets calling for a ceasefire with Israel and Gaza, were the very people championing Ukraine on, saying, go for it. We're not willing to go fight. We're not sending our kids, but you go ahead. You do it. Fight Russia for us. Fight, fight, fight. And many of us said, no, we need to get to a peace agreement, a ceasefire immediately. And we were ridiculed. Many of us were ridiculed, saying, how dare you? How dare you tell Ukraine to negotiate for peace and to give up some land that they weren't even in control of. They weren't even in control of the land. The land had been in a civil war with them for the last decade. The people in the Donbass were fighting against Ukraine. They weren't identifying with Ukraine. They weren't receiving any of the government services. Many of them were receiving passports and documentation from Russia in order to get around the world because they weren't working with the government of Ukraine. So the situation, it was very clear that part of the country in Ukraine didn't really want to be with Ukraine. They were clearly fighting for either their own independence or they were fighting to be with Russia. They were fighting fiercely, those fighters in the Donbass. They were doing their best. They were holding their own, but they exhausted. They got to a point where they couldn't do it anymore, and they were begging Russia to come in and save us, come in and help us out. They were down on their backs, and essentially Russia did come in. For Russia's own, of course, reasons. No country is going to just rush in and help out if they don't have their own geopolitical strategic reasons for doing so, and Russia had some. And so it was a good excuse to go and help the people in Donbass, the fighters in Donbass who were trying to get towards independence, and this is the result. And of course this was the result, because how was Ukraine going to recapture Donbass when they couldn't even get them when it was a civil war? When it was a civil war without the force of a nuclear power, superpower like Russia, they couldn't control Donbass. So what made anybody think they were suddenly going to control Donbass once a nuclear superpower jumped in on behalf of that region? It was never going to happen. So this was sickening. The outcome was expected. Many of us could see this coming, and now it's a stain on the good name or the goodwill of America, which has deteriorated rapidly over the last several decades. Left Ukraine in shambles and demoralized and defeated. I mean, this is just a terrible, terrible thing. So Zelensky, he's desperate. He's still desperate to keep fighting the war. He doesn't want to give up. He's asking for help, and he believes that if Trump becomes president, that maybe Trump will help him out. So during a Meet the Press interview, Zelensky invited Trump to Ukraine to see the war for himself in hopes that he'd offer more support if he becomes president. Watch this.
President Zelensky, former President Trump, who is the GOP frontrunner, has said that if he is reelected, he could end this war in 24 hours. What is your reaction and message to former President Trump about that?
Former President Trump said that about 24 hours that he can manage it and finish the war. For me, what can I say? So he's very welcome, first of all. President Biden was here and I think he understood some details which you can understand only being here. So I invite President Trump, if he can come here, I will need 24 minutes. Yes, 24 minutes, not more. Пояснити, yes, not more, 24 minutes to explain President Trump that he can't manage this war. He can't bring peace because of the Putin. But always we have if he's not trying and if he's not ready to give our territory for this terrible man, for the Putin. If you are not ready to give it, if you are not ready to give our independence, he can't manage it. Yes. He's very welcome.
He's welcome to come to Ukraine. Other presidential candidates have obviously come to Ukraine as well. Have you had any contact with former President Trump since he left office, President Zelensky?
No. That's why he's very welcome. To repeat our tradition, which was when he was the president.
Do you think he would have Ukraine's back if he were to be reelected?
I don't know. I don't know. I hope that it depends not only on presidents institutionally. I think it depends on the opinion of Americans, of your society. I think that is most important. I think it's important in the United States and EU, the attitude of just ordinary people. It's their support, it's their money. It's depends on them.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about.
So just absolutely devastating to see that. And he sounded like he was struggling. When I'd seen him speaking to Congress or his various different tours that he was doing throughout the last year and a half, his English seemed to be a little bit better. And I don't know if he's struggling because he's nervous, he's upset, he's feeling flustered and frustrated, but it is heartbreaking to see. It genuinely is. I was certainly not, I wasn't rooting for either side except for peace. Definitely wanted to see fewer dead people in this, knowing that the outcome was not going to be any different. And it is heartbreaking that Zelensky there has been lied to by the U.S. empire, telling him that we were going to have his back, and now he's got a bunch of dead Ukrainians to bury and devastated families. And the same for the Russians. They went in, but this was their choice to go in and do an invasion at the time that they chose to do it for whatever their reasons were. And maybe you feel like their reasons were justified or maybe not, but it doesn't matter either way. There are dead Russians as well. And the entire thing is extremely tragic. We should have been pushing Ukraine towards a peace agreement from the very beginning and just saying, you are not going to win this war. This is not going to be good, and the outcome isn't going to be good, so it's time to come to a peace agreement. But does the U.S. learn the lesson? Here we are thinking this makes us look mighty, right? Like we have to arm Ukraine because we have to fight Russia to show China that we are mighty. We are a mighty force to be reckoned with. Of course, Ukraine is making us look like fools and looking like we're weak and we're unable to actually defeat a superpower. This is a win for Russia. Let's face it, that is what it is. This is a win for Russia. So what does the U.S. do? Oh, the U.S. wants to do the same thing to Taiwan. Now, you would think that Taiwan would actually look at this situation in Ukraine and say, no, thanks, we're out of here. We're just going to have to make some peace agreements with China. We're not going to go down that same path and sacrifice lives only to, in the end up in the same position where we were in to begin with, which is China's our neighbor. They're right here. And it would be devastating to not have a friendship with them and a trade agreement with them and to continue some sort of friendly relations when they are our neighbor right here. So the U.S. apparently doesn't care, still trying to show it to China, stick it to Russia and stick it to China and show them we're so strong. According to the BBC, the U.S. is quietly arming Taiwan to the teeth. Yeah. Joe Biden recently signed off on an $80 million grant to Taiwan for the purchase of American military equipment. This is a grant. This means taxpayer dollars. It's a gift. It's not a loan. We're giving them $80 million of our money. So the U.S. is emphasizing the desperate need to improve our military capacity. It is sending a clear message of strategic clarity to Beijing that we stand together, says Wang Tingyu, a ruling party legislator with close ties to Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen, and to U.S. congressional chiefs. He says the $80 million is the tip of what could be a very large iceberg, and notes that in July, President Biden used discretionary powers to approve the sale of military services and equipment worth $500 million to Taiwan. Mr. Wang says Taiwan is preparing to send 2 battalions of ground troops to the U.S. for training, the first time this happened since the 1970s. But the key is the money. The beginning of what he says could be up to $10 billion over the next 5 years. So we don't learn any lessons, and clearly neither do these other countries. I mean, why would Taiwan now turn and rely, again, not a NATO country, we have no agreement with Taiwan, and they're not going to be let into NATO. Ukraine has a better shot at being let into NATO than Taiwan, that is for sure. Ukraine has a better shot at it than Taiwan. So you'd think Taiwan would look at what's going on in Ukraine and say, actually, you know what, never mind. Because we're not really your priority. The American people are not going to be sending troops to go and defend Taiwan against China. You know that's not going to be the case. Israel, that's different. The U.S. may send troops. I believe we have troops, ground troops, special forces actually on the ground in Israel at the moment. We've got a submarine on its way, a nuclear sub, and we've got the aircraft carriers. We've got thousands of troops now actually in the Middle East waiting to pounce if Israel says, pounce, we need you. That was not happening so much for Ukraine. Certainly won't happen for Taiwan. Sure, we have troops in the region. Of course, we have troops in the Southern Pacific. Of course, we have troops throughout Europe. But we weren't really going in to actually ramp up to potentially battle Russia, and we certainly won't be going in to battle China. So you think that Taiwan would actually catch a clue on the way things have happened with Ukraine and say, never mind, we don't trust you. But listen, there's a lot of money in war. There's a lot of money to be made. And ultimately, just like with COVID, right? Just like with COVID, they said, everybody, if you do X, Y, Z, we will end the pandemic. We will stop the spread. When they said, everybody get the vaccine and this will stop the spread and we'll end the pandemic if everybody just gets it. And they even tried to mandate it, saying everybody must for the good of the country. This is what needs to happen. And in the end, people still got COVID. The vaccine does not stop the spread. That is well known now, even though that was heavily debated. Saying, well, you gave it the booster. Okay, now the 4th shot. Oh, the 5th shot will do it. None of them did it. You can still get COVID after you've had the vaccine. The only thing that happened with that was that the vaccine makers got rich. There was an industry of people who got really, really, really wealthy. And that's what happens in war. The outcome is no different. The outcome is the same. But a group of people get really rich. And so with Ukraine, the outcome, like the pandemic, the same thing. The outcome's the same, but there's some really rich people now. And there's a lot of other wealthy people looking and eyeing Ukraine saying, we're ready to swoop in and start rebuilding the areas we can rebuild. And there's going to be money there. There's going to be loans to Ukraine, and Ukraine's going to be in debt. So not only did we wreck their country, the outcome's no different. Russia still secured the land that Russia intended to secure. They've got dead Ukrainians who are being mourned by the entire country and family members, mothers crying, wives crying, children crying. You've got all of that. And now they're going to be in debt. So not only did they lose their lives for us to battle Russia, but now they're going to be in debt to U.S. companies who are going to come in and try to rebuild and make a bunch of money off of Ukraine. And you take advantage of the fact it's a very corrupt country. So there's a lot of money laundering that could happen there. You'd think that Taiwan would learn. You'd think that America would learn. You'd think Americans would learn, and that many Americans would actually have taken to the streets calling for a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, calling for a peace agreement, much like what we're seeing in the streets now for Palestine. But we just did not see that. And in the end, unfortunately, Ukraine pays the price. And this is just a very, very cruel, heartless, terrible outcome for Ukraine, and a stain, again, on the American reputation, whatever's left of it anyway. All right, guys, I want to introduce you to the Wellness Company, and specifically their medical emergency kit. The Wellness Company is committed to supporting you through whatever the next thing is. Knock on wood, let's hope it's not another pandemic. Although I did see that Tedros with the WHO said another pandemic is coming. So, gear up, everybody. So the Wellness Company is going to help you gear up, because you got doctors like Peter McCullough, Dr. Peter McCullough, and you remember him. He was a big, really champion throughout the pandemic. He started the Wellness Company to build a parallel healthcare system and bring about change in an otherwise corrupt system. And part of that change is helping you take control of your health. And many people don't trust healthcare. In fact, over 40% of Americans say that they would avoid a doctor or a hospital unless it was a catastrophic situation. And that's where the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit comes in. You'll get 8 potentially life-saving medications for you to keep on hand in times of need. That includes natural disasters, supply chain shortages, medical emergencies, or an apocalyptic situation. You can rest easy knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to keep you and your family safe. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not a doctor, how would I know what to take? Well, the Wellness Company doctors have you covered, because the kit includes a guidebook detailing how, when, and the dosing for each of the medications. So if you're like me and you like to be prepared for the unexpected, go to twc.health/Kim. That link is down below. It's kind of difficult to remember, twc.health/Kim, and use code Kim to save 15% off at checkout. That's twc.health/Kim, code Kim for 15% off. All right. Well, the Committee to Protect Journalists has reported dozens of journalists have been killed, and countless more of their family members are dead from Israeli strikes over this past month. So according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, as of today, November 6th, 37 journalists and media workers have been confirmed dead. That is 32 Palestinian, 4 Israeli, and 1 Lebanese. 8 journalists were reported injured, 3 journalists are reported missing, and 8 journalists were reported arrested. So there have been multiple assaults, threats, cyber attacks, censorship, and killing of family members as well. Dozens upon dozens of family members have been killed of journalists. Now, since October 7th, since this war began, if you want to call it a war, I have a difficult time categorizing it as a war, because it's so lopsided on what one side has compared to the other. I mean, Israel has jets, missiles, they've got the full force of the American military and our weaponry, whereas Hamas are guerrilla fighters with homemade rockets and old trucks. They don't have tanks. They don't have real sophisticated weaponry. They're using old recycled AK-47s. I mean, there's not a lot, so it's more like it'd be like the U.S. military if, like, a U.S. gang took over a region and they thought that neighborhood is too far gone, so they kind of isolate it off, and then they just start bombing the heck out of it, and there's some gang members, and I mean, that's just kind of what it seems like to me a bit. It's a very unfair, lopsided war, if you want to call it that. I don't know what I don't know. I do not know what the right word would be to call it. It just doesn't feel quite right calling it a war. But since the war began, an estimated 11,000 have been killed, is what they're saying. And that is 9,900 Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, and 1,400 deaths in Israel. Those are the numbers as of today, and it's just getting worse. I do want to take the time. Being a journalist is a very it's a harrowing job in a lot of ways. You'd think that it's just this kind of take it easy, write up some things, see some things and report, but ultimately it is a very risky and it can be a very deadly job. And in Gaza, it's proving to be so. So I want to go through some of the journalists who have died or their family members have died tonight, just to showcase how deadly this job is, but also to pose the question, are these journalists being targeted? Israel says we are doing targeted airstrikes. We're targeting Hamas. Our goal is to wipe out Hamas. But we're seeing thousands of children killed, thousands of women killed. I believe in the numbers, 70% of the total deaths for Palestine have been women and children. That is about equal to the exact population of women and children in Gaza. And my guess is of the 9,000 or 11,000, 11,000 total killed, 37 of them being journalists. I'm curious if that is also proportionate to the population. If there's about 37 journalists, let's say, for every 10,000 people. That's possible. If that's the case, then the target to claim that these are targeted attacks, how could they be targeted when the death toll mimics the population, the actual demographics of the population? That would indicate that they're not targeting Hamas, they're just killing people. And that is what many people are upset about. That is why you're seeing the protests in the streets. That's why you're seeing people calling for a ceasefire, because they're looking at the numbers and looking at the horrible, horrible footage, which I'm not going to play for you, but there has been, just because a lot of people do not want to see it, and so I don't want to subject you to it, but there has been a lot of footage online of the deaths, of the massacres, on both sides, on the Israelis on October 7th. I've seen plenty of footage of what happened at the festival and in the kibbutz, and then countless, because there are about 10 times more Palestinian deaths, or 9 times at this point Palestinian deaths. We're seeing 9 times the footage coming out of Gaza of injured, dead, mutilated Palestinian bodies, and it is horrific what is happening there. But it's a question to pose to Israel is, if you are claiming to be targeting Hamas, why is it then the death toll seems to mimic the population or mirrors the population of Palestine in general? Let's go over some of these journalists who've been killed or they've lost their children. Let's look at this first one. This is Mohammed Alal. He lost 4. I'm sorry, I'm not the best at pronouncing these names, so I don't want to. Alalul, I think, Alalul, Muhammad Alalul. I'm going to guess that that's the way to say his name. I wish I could say it correctly. But he lost 4 of his children in the Israeli bombing. This happened a couple of nights ago. He lost 4 of his children. We have video of him also. He's a cameraman, and his family was killed in the strikes. And you could just see him there sobbing. His family was killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Al-Maghazi refugee camp that killed 45 people. And it's just terrible and sad. And all right, we've got Issam Abdallah. He's 37. He's a journalist in South Lebanon that was killed by an Israeli airstrike. And there he is. This is Israeli airstrike kills Palestinian journalist along with a number of, I see we're skipping ahead. Let me see where this one is. Or maybe I don't have that on my list right here. But this is the Lebanese. This was 2 cars that were in Lebanon, and Israeli airstrikes actually hit the 2 cars. the journalist, the Lebanese journalist, he was traveling with his sister and his sister's 3 children, and the airstrikes ended up killing his sister, and a couple of the kids, and I believe that the only survivor was his niece. Him and his niece survived, but he was targeted and killed. And again, the question is, are these journalists being targeted because they're reporting in a way that Israel is not happy with? Beyond not happy, Israel's losing the narrative war. Previously, throughout the 75 years of Israel's existence, Israel has had a firm grip on the narrative. People supported Israel unwavering. They said the Palestinians are causing terrorist attacks and they're creating violence. And now, since there's social media, Israel's actually losing the narrative war, and people are seeing the atrocities committed online. People are hearing more about the blockade, and they're hearing about the occupation, and they're hearing that these Gazans were being left with no opportunities, that Israel controlled all of their resources. They were not a sovereign nation being run on their own. There's some propaganda saying that, oh, these Gazans, they were their own sovereign nation and they should have taken care of their own people. But all of their resources were controlled by Israel. So Israel could decide what went in and what came out of Gaza. Israel decided at times to ban macaroni and crayons and cookies and candies. And you have to wonder, which demographic were they really aiming at when they're banning candy and cookies and crayons and macaroni? That doesn't sound like they're actually targeting Hamas fighters and limiting their ability to create weapons, build weapons. They instead were making lives miserable for small children who would then grow up and be radicalized. And one must wonder if that was the strategy. Was the strategy to radicalize this group of people, to get them to fight back? What Israel knows throughout its history is that every time the Palestinians fight back, every time the Palestinians rise up and fight back, Israel is stronger and mightier, and they have American-made weapons, and they win. And when they win, they take more land. That has been their strategy. And so they say, well, they keep losing wars and we keep winning land, and that's the way it is. Meanwhile, World War II, we did not take Germany. We did not take Japan. We did not take Italy. We did not start occupying it or ethnically cleansing those regions, saying it's ours now, all of you Germans get out. That would have been maybe more fair if we would have said, hey, Germany, we're going to carve up the south of it, and this is where the Jews are going to live, a home for the Jews, and this is now going to be called Israel, and you guys, this is the reparation you have to pay for what you did. But that's not what happened. Germany got to keep all of its land. Italy got to keep all of its land. Japan got to keep all of its land. And they lost the war, a big war, in fact. But the Palestinians, the punishment for losing wars is lose land. And that has caused them to be angrier and angrier, and to rise up and to fight back. And every single time they fight back, because they're weak and they're not allowed a military and they have to make these homemade rockets, they end up losing quite predictably, and then they take more land. And that's so the question is, when Israel's targeting Gaza, when they're limiting these goods going in and out, and it's clearly goods that would be enjoyed by young children, is this a way to radicalize them, to get them to hate, to breed hate, to where they rise up and then you end up being able to justify an ethnic cleansing campaign? That is what it looks like. And it's a strategy that has been admitted by Netanyahu over the decades. He's a radical far-right extremist running the Israeli government. Not everybody in Israel is extreme, but there are quite a few of them. And Netanyahu is in the lead, and he has been carrying this out, supporting Hamas, telling his counterparts in Israel in the Knesset that you must support this if you want to have a complete and full Israel nation. Then you would support the funding of Hamas, because this will cause the division between the Palestinians. They'll rise up, they'll be violent, and we'll have a reason to eradicate them. And now we've seen more and more calls for Israel to move these people, the Palestinian people who are currently in Gaza, to move them to Egypt. There's been calls and pressure on Egypt to take them. And since Egypt is on the American welfare program, they're the second largest recipient of welfare, of American welfare, right behind Israel. They're sort of at the behest of the United States. Egypt will do whatever the United States wants, and the U.S. wants what Israel wants. And that is why Israel won't take a lot of the refugees, for a couple of reasons. One, because the people in Egypt don't want to give Israel a win and allow and ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and take them off their hands so that they can say, okay, good. Now we got the Gaza Strip back. It's time to bulldoze it down and build some oceanfront condos. Egypt doesn't want to help with that, but also Egypt is on the U.S. welfare program. And because of that, money talks and they do whatever the United States wants. I want to move on to this journalist. This is a Palestinian journalist killed. He was killed along with a number of his family members in the central Gaza Strip. This one is really tragic. Another Palestinian journalist in Gaza killed by Israel. This is Mohammed Abu Hattab. 11 members of his family, as well as him, were killed in south of Gaza. So all the residents have been told, go south, evacuate. And then when people are killed in the north, they say, well, we told them to go south. Well, these residents were killed in the south. So Israel's been bombarding the south as well as the north. There is no safe place. His death was being announced on TV. And watch this journalist. You won't be able to understand him, but you'll understand him as he's talking. He's emotional and he's saying, there is no safe place for us. We're just waiting to die. Watch this video.
القبعات إنها مجرد شعارات نرتديها فقط، هي لا تحمي أي صحفي على الإطلاق. على الإطلاق لا تحمينا هذه الدروع ولا هذه ما نرتديها فقط هي شعارات فقط. نحن هنا ضحايا على الهواء مباشرة، نفقد الأرواح واحدا تلو الآخر بلا أي ثمن، نمضي شهداء فقط مع فرق التوقيت. نحن ننتظر الدور واحدا تلو الآخر. زميلنا محمد أبو حطب كان هنا منذ نصف ساعة فقط وغادرنا الآن هو وزوجته وابنه وأخيه وكثير من عائلته هم ضحايا هنا في داخل المستشفى.
Saying we're just waiting to die. Why even wear this? We're just waiting to die. Covering the war and we're just waiting to die. Here's a video of the journalists and friends praying over the body of Mohammed Abu Hattab and 11 of his family members after they were killed in their home after it was hit by Israeli airstrikes. Just absolutely tragic. The press being targeted. Possibly. We don't know for sure if the press is being targeted or if it is just this is the percentage of the population that's press, and since the entire population seems to be targeted because the death toll seems to mimic or mirror the demographics, it's unclear if these journalists are being actively targeted. There's certainly suspicion of that, or if they're just casualties of the many who are being killed indiscriminately by Israel. As much as they're saying there's airstrikes, the evidence, targeted airstrikes, the evidence doesn't show that they're targeting. The evidence shows the opposite. When you've got this many women, children, and journalists being slaughtered, the evidence shows these are not targeted airstrikes just going after Hamas. And of course, Israel's response every time is, well, they're hiding in the schools, they're hiding in the hospitals, they're hiding in the apartment buildings, they're hiding everywhere. So it's just giving them cover to just go and target anywhere and everywhere as they please and just say, well, Hamas was there. This one was heartbreaking. Many of you saw this. This was October 25th. Al Jazeera, the chief of the Gaza bureau for Al Jazeera, his family, as he was reporting, he discovered his family had been killed. His wife, his son, his daughter, and his grandchild were killed in an Israeli airstrike in a house that was supposed to be safe. It was considered a safe zone. And again, they were hit. Now, this is why people think maybe there was some targeting here, because Al Jazeera was told by the United States and Israel to tone down the coverage a bit, that the coverage was just really painting Israel in a negative light. And this is the bureau chief in Gaza who's in charge of that coverage. And the very next day, his family is massacred. Here he is, even after his family was killed, he speaks as to why he then went back out there and started reporting some more. Watch this.
Our message is clear. We'll keep working to accomplish our media mission. We'll do the job regardless of the high price, the pain, and the wounds. These wounds won't heal. However, at the end of the day, I have a mission and a duty. We have a noble humanitarian message. We're covering the Gaza stories in a fair, transparent, and professional way. We're not a party in this war. The whole world needs to understand that we're reporting what's happening on the ground. However, it seems that our coverage does not please some parties. I mean here the Israeli occupation forces. So these Israeli forces target our family members and our fellow journalists. This is an utter Israeli failure. The whole world watched us covering the stories among the dead bodies, destruction and bombing. We observe professionalism amid all shocking and distressing scenes. There is no other choice. We can't stay at home like children and women waiting for a bomb to kill us. I'm determined to continue my job despite all my pain and wounds and the heavy price I have paid.
Do you think the targeting of journalists' family members is deliberate? Can these attacks affect the coverage of the news stories?
I do not exclude any scenario. There are no red lines in this war. Hospitals, churches, mosques and places of worship were all targeted. Marketplaces and civilian houses are destroyed over the heads of their residents. Some Israeli journalists were proud to say that the Israeli army targeted the family of an Al Jazeera correspondent. Big shame on them. How can they take revenge on our families because we are covering the story in a professional way? They have no shame. These Israelis have failed. And to continue my job only hours after burying the bodies of my family members is my answer to the Israelis. The Israeli attacks won't stop or halt our coverage of this crazy war on the Gaza Strip.
So tragic, terrible, but good for him for getting back out there and continuing to cover the stories. It's he's not alone for sure when it comes to family members being killed. I do want to show you this video. This is of his wife, his daughter and his son. The son was for sure killed. I believe this daughter survived. I'm not 100% certain. I know he had another daughter that was killed and a grandchild, which might have been this daughter's child that was killed. But I want to show you this video. His family was also in on journalism and making stories for the world to see. So watch this.
Do you know what's happening in Gaza Strip?
For the fifth day, Gaza Strip is living in a continuous violence, a complete siege and cutting off electricity, internet and water, and targeting safe houses.
Whole neighborhoods have been destroyed, of which there is only rubble and ashes. In Gaza, there is no place safe. Homes, hospitals, mosques and schools are unsafe.
This is the fierce and the most violence war we have lived in Gaza.
Where are the human rights? Where are the international laws? Where are the countries of the world to see what's happening for us? Help us to stay alive.
He didn't survive. Another journalist on that same day, he also got the grim news that his family was also killed. This is Mohammed Farah, and he is finding out the news that his family had been killed at the same time, the same day. I'm not clear if it's in the same strike or if it was a different strike, but absolutely tragic to discover that his family was murdered as he's trying to cover the war. Palestinian journalist Mataz Azeza, he rushed into Gaza to report on the war, only to discover his entire family had been killed in an airstrike. Dozens of his own family members, 14, I believe, members of his family were killed in the airstrikes. He is a friend of Dan Cohen, who's been on this show. Dan Cohen lived in Gaza for 7 months, lived in Palestine for 3 years, Jewish, and lived in these areas to see what was going on. And he's a big, one of the big voices against what is going on with how Israel is treating the Palestinians. He's seen it with his own eyes. And this is actually a friend of his who had this happen. So Dan has been really following along with Mataz very carefully, and it's just absolutely tragic what is going on. So journalists are under attack. Again, unclear if the journalists are being targeted directly in order to silence them, in order to change the narrative since Israel's losing that war on the narrative war on this, or if they're just more casualties in this because the strikes are not actually targeted, they're just indiscriminate and people are dying, and maybe they're it's the proportion of the population that are journalists. It's unclear, but it's just tragic, and I wanted to show what was going on, this angle of it. There's so much to cover when it comes to this war, but this is what I wanted to focus on tonight. So thank you for watching this. Just really absolutely tragic, and you know, all deaths on all sides of this. On the Israeli side, the innocent civilians who've lost their lives, the innocent children, the people who are still being held hostage, wondering if they're going to make it home or if they themselves are going to be bombed by their own country. To the Palestinians who are suffering greatly and being indiscriminately killed, and clearly in a campaign to get them to move south and to get them to move completely on into Egypt, to no longer be a problem for Israel, people wanting to stay and live on their own land. The whole thing is just absolutely tragic, and we do hope that this comes to an end and that there is a genuine, good faith attempt to negotiate peace. I know Russia has now offered itself as a negotiator for peace. People don't seem to understand that Russia actually has a good relationship with Israel. They are not enemies. In fact, Israel was one of the few countries that would not condemn Russia and their invasion in Ukraine because of their relationship being so strong. Russia also has a relationship with Hamas. Russia has been one of the biggest forces fighting actual terrorism in the Middle East, and they have a relationship with both sides, similar to Turkey, and they can facilitate a peace agreement. But will the U.S. step aside and allow more unbiased parties to actually come in and try to negotiate peace? That is yet to be seen. The United States certainly has a bias. I think that's very clear, and we're going to get into that. But it would be good if there could be maybe another entity going in and actually negotiate peace. Again, another stain on the United States reputation, or whatever's left of it. Let's move on to the main story for tonight. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he flew on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express. This was something that was revealed back in 2021, but since he's now running for president, it's really come out and people are focusing on it. So this Newsweek article came out just the other day. Exclusive, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he flew on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express. It goes on to say he has clarified the nature of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after it was revealed that the presidential hopeful had flown on the convicted sex offender's private jet. The independent 2024 presidential candidate was among a number of high-profile people who, in 2021, were named as passengers on Epstein's jet, which was often used to transport guests to the financier's private Caribbean island, Little St. James. Epstein's luxury Boeing 727 was derisively referred to as the Lolita Express by a number of media outlets following allegations that it was used to fly underage girls to some of the multimillionaire's properties. Following Epstein's death in jail in 2019, which was ruled a suicide. I like how they put it, which was ruled a suicide rather than Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, because who believes that? Lists have been shared on social media purporting to show the public figures who had visited the island, which is located east of Puerto Rico in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We're going to go into what Kennedy had to say. Kennedy said that he had flown one time on Jeffrey. Actually, it said that this was a spokesperson, I want to clarify this, a spokesperson for the former Democrat exclusively told Newsweek that he had flown one time on Jeffrey Epstein's private plane. It was in 1993 from New York City to Palm Beach, Florida to visit RFK Jr.'s mom for Easter. And the spokesperson added that the private jet trip was made possible by Kennedy's then wife, Mary Richardson Kennedy, who was friendly with Epstein's partner at the time, Ghislaine Maxwell. Richardson Kennedy passed away in 2012. She committed suicide. Kennedy has been married to Cheryl Hines since 2014. Said Mary Kennedy's wife, and two of their kids were on the flight. The representative said Mary knew Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who learned they were going to Palm Beach for Easter, and they offered their family a ride. So that's the story coming from the spokesperson. I want to tell you some of the names that were listed in 2021 that had ridden on the Lolita Express. That would be Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., violinist Itzhak Perlman, U.S. Senator John Glenn, and former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was asked about this because this came out in 2021, this list, and Whitney Webb, who's been hot on the trail of what's been going on, everything Epstein, she wrote a book, One Nation Under Blackmail, her volume 2, and she talked to RFK Jr. about this, and he actually said he had ridden on the plane twice to Whitney Webb. He said that on 2 occasions he was on Epstein's plane that had been arranged between Ghislaine Maxwell and Mary Richardson. In one instance, the flight was part of a pre-planned fossil hunting trip to South Dakota, which he believed had been Ghislaine's idea, as Epstein had appeared to only have attended grudgingly. And then he also said that the other flight was the return trip to New York from South Dakota. Oh, sorry, the other flight was the one to from New York to Palm Beach in order to visit Ethel Kennedy, his mother. And he said that he and Mary were accompanied by Kennedy's 2 older children on each flight. So both times the kids were there on the flight. Whitney Webb actually brought this up because the Newsweek report said that he'd only, and the spokesperson said he was only on once. And Whitney was like, wait a minute. I'm more concerned that he told me he was on it twice, but now the reports are he's only on it once. What is going on there? So he actually clarified in a Twitter space. Listen to this.
I want to take this opportunity to correct a tweet that we put up yesterday. We were called, Stephanie was called and asked, and I'm on the road, so I'm speaking to her remotely, and a lot of times I'll talk to her and then she'll put up a tweet. We were asked about a 1993 entry from Jeffrey Epstein's flight logs that showed me on his plane, me and my wife Mary and 2 of my kids. Mary was actually pregnant at that time with Connor, my 3rd child. That happened over Easter in 1993, and I answered her that yeah, my wife Mary had known Ghislaine Maxwell a little bit, and and Ghislaine found out this was Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend. He found out that we were going to go to Palm Beach to visit my mother who lived there over the Easter holiday, and she offered us a ride. So I rode on that. I went on that flight. Of course, this is a time when nobody knew anything about Epstein and his shenanigans. I don't know if they even begun. This was 30 years ago. I don't even know if he'd begun all of his saga at that point. I'm sure he was involved in something bad. But there was actually there's another episode. It's the way that the tweet went, that Stephanie wrote the tweet. That was the only time I was on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. But actually, there was another time around the same time. I think it was a couple of months later. I went again with my wife Mary and my 2 older kids on his plane to Deadwood, South Dakota, to spend the day fossil hunting, to take the kids to Mount Rushmore and to Sitting Bull Memorial, and then go fossil hunting for a day. So we rode out there with them and again rode back, and that was the only time that I'd been on that plane. And of course, I never knew anything about what Jeffrey Epstein never. These things the same as everybody else did by reading them in the newspapers. Incidentally, lived in New York at that time and who were operating at a level where, like where I was, raising money for charities, for the waterkeepers and for Hudson River Keeper. I ran into a lot of people whose lives have since turned out to have a lot of very, very bad and disturbing secrets. I knew O.J. Simpson very well. I knew Bill Cosby very, very well. I knew Harvey Weinstein. I knew Roger Ailes. And many, many others. But you run into people in New York And you have no idea, no way of knowing until it's revealed in the newspapers of Jeffrey Epstein with Whitney Webb, was the investigative reporter who was doing a story on him. So that's it. I just wanted to get that on the table, and then let's open it up for questions.
Okay, so he says there, I went on it twice. I just want to clarify that. Didn't know anything about Epstein and his shenanigans at the time. I've been friends with Bill Cosby, O.J. Simpson, Roger Ailes, right? He goes on and names. There's a lot of people who I know and have been friends with who've had, later on bad things, terrible things came out about them. Now, look, so he went twice in 1993. I'm going to say that people who we see a lot of people connected to Epstein. Maybe there's photographs of them at a party together, or people that maybe did take the jet, or the people that maybe visited his house for meetings and whatnot, because he didn't really have an office space. He conducted most of his meetings at his house. I think that for the most part, people connected to Epstein are not automatically guilty. Just because we see a photograph or we see a meeting or them appearing on the plane, it doesn't mean that they're automatically guilty. However, I get suspicious when the person has a connection to Epstein and they have an unwavering, inexplicable support for Israel. They just seem to be waving the Israeli flag quite a bit, and there's no real rhyme or reason to it, and they have a connection to Epstein. That, to me, then merits more scrutiny and more questioning, because many people believe that Epstein was, that the blackmail operation that Epstein was engaged in was a Mossad honey trap, that's what it was. And there's a lot of evidence to point towards that. So, and as we know, RFK Jr. has, like most politicians, shown unwavering support for Israel, even though it doesn't really align much with his messaging. His messaging has been very anti-war, and we shouldn't be engaging in all of this. Yet when it comes to Israel, he's been extremely, extremely supportive. A little uncomfortably so. I feel like there was a period of time where there were more photographs of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the Israeli flag than with the American flag, and that was pretty suspect when he was doing a lot of the parades and marching and doing meetings with Rabbi Shmuley. And here is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Again, he's been saying we have to stand with Israel. We have to stand with Israel. He's been making excuses for their indiscriminate bombing, for the killing of children, even though he's children's health defense. He's been defending children and their health throughout his career. And yet now children are being killed indiscriminately in Israel. And he's saying, well, he's kind of shrugging his shoulders on it and making excuses for Israel, really touting the narrative line. And so that's really eyebrow raising. And then when you find out that he's been on Epstein's jet twice, it's eyebrow raising. Here's one of his tweets. I just want to point this out. This is the latest. He actually tweeted out, "Bravo, Bill Aikman. It's time to hold college administrations responsible for the epidemic of campus anti-Semitism by insisting on zero tolerance policies." So he's now insisting on zero tolerance policies. That's censorship that Aikman is calling for. He actually wrote a letter to the president of Harvard demanding a task force be created to identify students using slogans interpreted by some as being genocidal. And those are just interpretations. People are not calling outright for genocide, but people are saying, well, if you're waving the Palestinian flag, then you're for genocide. So he's wanting to identify students using slogans interpreted by some as being genocidal and to ensure that they face disciplinary action. He calls for a permanent mark placed on their records, preventing them from being hired by employers. He wants their Slack messages monitored for anti-Semitic statements and imagery, like, again, the Palestinian flag, and he wants students to turn each other in. And this is a tweet that he wrote out, a very long tweet, his letter to Harvard. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says, bravo, bravo, more censorship to combat anti-Semitism. And we want Big Brother monitoring and a task force and these kids' lives to be completely ruined. So, he's got this unwavering, inexplicable support for Israel. We don't understand it. We don't really get it, but we know that he was on it. But again, there's a lot. I mean, look, I don't think that most of the politicians, like all of the politicians in the government, most of them support Israel. Do I think that there is some sort of Mossad blackmail on all of them? No, I don't think there's Mossad blackmail on all of them, but maybe quite a few, or their family members. And then there's other pressure that's put on by the Israel lobby. There's plenty of money, and there's a lot of threats to primary a person or to take their campaign down or to just trash them endlessly. And that is something that a lot of politicians don't want to deal with. So there's a lot of reasons why a politician would support Israel, unwavering support, give them all of it, anything they ask for. And that's what Robert F. Kennedy calls for is anything they want. But again, eyebrows are raised if you have a connection to Epstein, especially since Robert F. Kennedy Jr., at that time in particular in 1993, had a pretty sordid past. He was not the most upstanding character sexually. He admits to being addicted to sex. He called it his lust demons when he was married to Mary Richardson, who he was on the plane with. He had cheated on her numerous times. There was actually a diary that came out. The New York Post put this out, RFK's sex diary, his secret journal of affairs. This diary was found by his ex-wife that you see there in the photograph. He says that in this diary, he talks about grappling with his lust demons, but he also kept a scorecard of more than 24 conquests while he was married. He had codes for the women showing sex acts, 10 meaning intercourse. 1 through 10 is kind of depending on what sex act they did together. There were apparently in this diary 37 women named, 16 got 10s, so he slept with 16 of these women. Apparently in the journal on November 13th of 2001, RFK Jr. records a triple play, three separate encounters. Codes 10, so he had sex with one of them, 3 and a 2, whatever those are. And they occurred on the same day that he attended a black tie fundraiser at the Waldorf Astoria for Christopher Reeve's charity, where he sat next to the paralyzed Superman star and magician David Blaine and comic Richard Belzer, according to this. So, he was known for being addicted to drugs, for having a sex addiction, for not being the most upstanding person, and this was his second wife. So, there's questions there. There's questions there. Was there a honey trap plan? And that's a question I think that's fair for anybody to ask. So, especially if you're going to give unwavering support. Now, let's go into why many people believe that Epstein was a Mossad honey trap blackmail operation. We know that he was intelligence. U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, when he was actually given his first deal, when they caught him and convicted him the first time, he was given a sweetheart deal, didn't really have to do, he got basically a slap on the wrist. And it was because U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta at the time said, I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. What intelligence? Which intelligence? CIA, Mossad, both? Unclear, but he clearly belonged to intelligence because the U.S. attorney was told to leave him alone and give him a sweet deal. And he got that sweet deal. I want to show you this video. This is from RT, and this kind of goes over some of the connection between Robert Maxwell, who's Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and Epstein. Let's go ahead and watch this.
You maintain that it was your employer, Robert Maxwell, owner of the Daily Mirror. You say that he was an Israeli agent, and as was his daughter.
He was not my employer. I would like to correct that.
Okay.
We worked together with him.
And you say that his daughter Ghislaine also, though, worked for Israel, and it was Robert Maxwell who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell way before the 1990s, as mainstream media is reporting.
Correct.
I suppose what the most alarming allegations that you've been making are that the entire Epstein operation was a honey trap operation to entrap politicians, policymakers, celebrities, people in the media eye, basically to become Israel's assets.
Correct. That it became basically an intelligence operation to entrap different politicians.
So that's an ex-Israeli spy claiming that Epstein was blackmailed, or that he was blackmailing people in a honey trap, and that Robert Maxwell was part of it. Now, Robert Maxwell was given a hero's funeral by Israel. So this is one thing that points to Robert Maxwell actually being a Mossad asset himself. When he died, he was honored by the country. Many Mossad agents showed up to his funeral, and the prime minister of Israel at the time gave his eulogy. So he was given a hero's farewell as if he had done a lot for the country. And in fact, the prime minister who eulogized him said that he had done more for Israel than anybody would ever know. So perhaps that is pointing towards a Mossad honey trap operation, that Epstein was involved in that. Then and Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Robert Maxwell's favorite child and his biggest confidant, and that, you know, the dots connect there. And then Epstein reportedly commits suicide, and all the things line up for him to be able to do that, with the cameras and the guards and the fact that he had the right equipment at the time in order to even commit suicide. And on top of it, what gets even more suspicious is that the modeling agent who was thought to supply many of the girls for these wealthy people in order to blackmail them also suicided himself in jail before he could be brought up into court. And Ghislaine Maxwell, who is more, you know, is quiet and able to keep things quiet, apparently. You know, maybe they knew, maybe she doesn't need to be suicided because she's not going to talk. I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but conspiracy theories could be conspiracy truths, and especially when the dots connect and things certainly aren't adding up, and we're not getting the list of Epstein's clients, and we're getting very limited information. And there's perhaps a honey trap operation that is working for the very purpose of this time in Israel's history. If Mossad was blackmailing politicians or their family members, targeting their children, getting them in compromising situations, or targeting the politicians themselves or people in power, it is for this very moment. It is to gain unwavering support for Israel, to turn a blind eye to the things that they're doing, even though we're all witnessing with our own eyes the atrocities. Our politicians act like, it's okay, it's fine, it's no big deal, this is okay. Everybody just support Israel. And that makes us wonder, why in the world would they just give such unwavering support without saying, hey, maybe what you're doing is actually really wrong. Maybe we don't want to support this. Maybe we don't want to give you $14 billion for this operation. Maybe we don't want to help you push all of these people into Egypt. None of those questions are really happening. So there's a lot of eyebrows being raised, and a lot of questions, and a lot of wondering about these lists and the powerful people that are on these lists, and the possibility that maybe there was something collected on them that is ensuring that they all stand with Israel no matter what, at all costs. Don't even question it. And it's a good thing to wonder. I want to play this last clip. This is when I interviewed Alan Dershowitz. He says he's never going to be on the show again because he felt bombarded when I asked him about Epstein, even though we said in advance we would be asking questions about Epstein. But I want to play this clip for you because I'm asking him specifically about Mossad and this potentially being a Mossad operation. And this is what he had to say about Jeffrey Epstein. Well, many of us suspect that Jeffrey Epstein was an asset to Mossad, and that Ghislaine Maxwell was in fact an agent of Mossad. There's a lot of evidence that point to this direction, and that they were operating a blackmail operation in order to get very powerful people, including people like yourself, in precarious positions to where you could potentially work on behalf of the state of Israel or protect the state of Israel.
I've been working on the state of Israel. I've been working for the state of Israel since before you were born. Jeffrey Epstein once visited me in Israel. He had never been there. He didn't know anybody in Israel. He didn't work for the Mossad. The Mossad wouldn't hire him. And I hope he had videotapes of everybody, because they would show I never did anything improper.
And maybe Alan Dershowitz never did. He did write a book, The Case for Israel. So Alan Dershowitz is a big, huge proponent for Israel. And he says he'd been working for Israel for longer than I was born. So perhaps Alan Dershowitz is also working. Maybe there is more conspiracy there that are not theories, but truths. It's unclear. But I do know that Alan Dershowitz has been very much defending, if you look back at his defense of who he's defended, there was after 9/11, the dancing, the men that were caught on camera dancing. It looked like they were dancing. They were Israeli citizens, and Alan Dershowitz was one who I believe went in and helped clear that up and get those men out of the country and back to Israel. And again, he's written a book on it. And so the case for Israel. So there's, I think it's important for us to ask questions. I think it's important for us to, as I asked Alan Dershowitz, for us to be asking other people in positions of power or people who are vying for positions of power these questions. I think it's fair. If somebody sat on an airplane with Epstein, I think it's completely fair to then question and scrutinize that and not necessarily take their word for it. No one's going to say, oh, yeah, I'm totally involved and I hung out at Epstein's house and saw some girls and had some fun. And no one's going to admit that. So, of course, they're going to say it was innocent. It was nothing. And we, the people, have the opportunity to listen to what they say, and we get to decide if we believe them. And we look at all the evidence and we connect all the dots and we say, I don't know. I mean, so ask questions, scrutinize. But right now, we are seeing a lot of support for Israel, a lot of unwavering support, and a lot of it seems to be very questionable, or it's how can these people actually turn a blind eye or believe the things that they're actually saying? It doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it's probably because it doesn't make sense. And something else makes sense if you dig a little bit deeper. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate you being here. And we will be back again tomorrow night with another great show, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern here on Rumble. Until then, guys, we will see you tomorrow. Have a great night. Bye-bye.